April Luxist, 1988. Good Friday, Fort Wayne, Indiana. A blue-collar city in the northeastern corner of the state, where manufacturing plants line the rivers and neighborhoods are tight-knit. The kind of place where children play outside until the streetlights come on, and neighbors know each other's business. April Marie Tinsley lived on West William Street with her mother, Janet Tinsley, and her stepfather, Mike. She was 8 years old, third grade at Fairfield Elementary School. Long brown hair that fell past her shoulders, bright eyes, a gap-toothed smile. She loved coloring, playing with dolls, riding her bicycle up and down the sidewalk. She was a typical little girl in a typical American neighborhood. Good Friday, 1988, was a warm spring day. School was out for Easter break. April had been playing at her friend's house a few blocks away, a little girl named Stephanie. The two had spent the afternoon coloring and playing games. Around 3 p.m., April decided to walk home. It was broad daylight. The walk was short, less than half a mile, mostly along residential streets April knew well. Stephanie's mother watched April leave. She saw her walk to the end of the block and turn the corner onto Hoagland Avenue. That was the last time anyone saw April Tinsley alive. April never made it home. By 3:30 p.m., Janet Tinsley began to worry. By 4 p.m., she was frantic. She called Stephanie's house. Yes, April had left to walk home more than an hour ago. Janet ran outside, calling April's name, checking with neighbors, retracing the route April would have taken. Nothing. No sign of her daughter. At 4:30 p.m., Janet called the Fort Wayne Police Department. Her 8-year-old daughter had disappeared while walking home in the middle of the afternoon. Police responded immediately. They canvassed the neighborhood. They questioned residents. They searched yards, alleys, abandoned buildings. They brought in tracking dogs. The dogs picked up April's scent along Hoagland Avenue. The scent ended abruptly at the curb. The conclusion was inescapable. April had been picked up by someone in a vehicle. By nightfall, Fort Wayne was in a state of panic. An 8-year-old girl had been abducted off the street in broad daylight. Volunteers joined the search. Hundreds of people combed through parks, wooded areas, drainage ditches. Police set up roadblocks. They stopped cars. They questioned drivers. They issued an Amber Alert, though in 1988, the system was not yet standardized, and alerts were limited to local media broadcasts. April's face appeared on television screens across northeast Indiana. News anchors pleaded for information. Janet Tinsley appeared on camera, her voice breaking, begging whoever had taken April to bring her home safely. Easter Sunday came and went. The Tinsley family spent the holiday in anguish, waiting for news, praying for a miracle. The miracle never came. Monday, April 4th, 1988, 3 days after April's disappearance. A jogger was running along a rural road in DeKalb County, roughly 20 miles north of Fort Wayne, near the small farming community of Spencerville. The area was remote. Farmland stretched in every direction. There were few houses, fewer people. At approximately 8:30 a.m., the jogger passed a drainage ditch on the north side of County Road 68. Something in the ditch caught his eye. He stopped. He looked closer. And then he saw her. A small body, partially concealed by tall grass and debris. The jogger ran to the nearest farmhouse and called 911. DeKalb County Sheriff's deputies arrived within minutes. They secured the scene. They photographed the area. They carefully recovered the body. It was a young girl. She was wearing a light-colored shirt and pink pants. No shoes, no jacket. She had been dead for several days. Dental records confirmed what everyone already feared. The body was April Tinsley. The news shattered Fort Wayne. Parents held their children tighter. Doors that had always been left unlocked were now bolted. Children who had once played freely outside were now kept within sight. Fear settled over the community like fog. The autopsy was performed by Dr. Joseph Estrada, the DeKalb County coroner. What he found was beyond comprehension. April had been sexually assaulted, viciously, repeatedly. There was extensive trauma. Biological evidence was collected: semen, saliva, traces of the monster who had done this. April had been strangled, manually. Someone had wrapped their hands around her small throat and squeezed the life out of her. Ligature marks suggested she may also have been strangled with a cord or rope. The hyoid bone in her neck was fractured. Petechial hemorrhaging in her eyes indicated prolonged asphyxiation. Dr. Estrada estimated the time of death to be within hours of her abduction on April 1st. April had been killed quickly. Then her body had been dumped in that ditch, discarded like trash, left for the elements and the animals. The manner of death was ruled a homicide. Cause of death: asphyxiation due to strangulation. The findings were released to investigators. The profile of the killer became clear. This was a sexual predator, someone who targeted children, someone who was capable of extreme violence, someone who was still out there. The Fort Wayne Police Department and the DeKalb County Sheriff's Office formed a joint task force. Every available detective was assigned to the case. The investigation became the highest priority in both jurisdictions. The biological evidence recovered during the autopsy was sent to the Indiana State Police Laboratory for analysis. In 1988, DNA testing was in its infancy. Expensive, time-consuming, not widely used. But forensic scientists could determine blood type, and they could preserve evidence for future analysis. The semen recovered from April's body indicated the perpetrator had type A blood shared by roughly 40% of the population. It was something, but it wasn't much. Detectives cast a wide net. They compiled a list of every registered sex offender in Northeast Indiana. Everyone was questioned. Everyone was asked to account for their whereabouts on April 1st. Everyone was investigated. None could be definitively linked to the crime. Investigators looked at April's family, as they always do. Janet Tinsley and her husband were thoroughly investigated. Their backgrounds were examined. Their alibis were verified. They were cleared. Detectives interviewed hundreds of people: neighbors, teachers, family friends, anyone who had contact with April. They reviewed traffic camera footage from the area around Hoagland Avenue. They checked vehicle registrations. They followed up on tips called in by the public. Witnesses reported seeing a suspicious vehicle in April's neighborhood on the afternoon of April 1st, a small, older model blue pickup truck. Several people reported seeing the truck driving slowly through the area, the driver appearing to watch children playing outside. But no one had gotten a license plate number. No one could identify the driver. The lead went nowhere. Weeks turned into months. The investigation continued, but progress stalled. The task force remained active, but without new evidence, there was nowhere to go. By the end of 1988, April Tinsley's case had gone cold, but the killer wasn't finished. May 1990, more than 2 years after April's murder. A woman in Fort Wayne was walking her dog through her neighborhood when she found something disturbing in her mailbox. It was a handwritten note, written in crude block letters on a piece of lined paper. The note read, "Hi honey, I've been watching you. I am the same person that kidnapped and raped and killed April Tinsley." The woman immediately called the police. Detectives responded. They collected the note. They canvassed the neighborhood. 3 other residents reported finding similar notes in their mailboxes. All 4 notes contained the same message. All 4 notes were written in the same hand. The handwriting was analyzed. It was distinctive, large, blocky, childlike in appearance, but clearly written by an adult. The paper was standard lined notebook paper, available in any store. There were no fingerprints. The discovery of the notes sent shockwaves through Fort Wayne. The killer was taunting police. He was announcing himself. He was watching, and he was reveling in the fear he had created. Police increased patrols in the affected neighborhoods. They held community meetings. They urged residents to be vigilant, to report anything suspicious. But the notes stopped as suddenly as they had appeared. No more were found. The case went quiet again, for a while. 2004. 14 years after the first round of notes, 16 years after April's murder, Fort Wayne had tried to move on. Parents who had young children in 1988 now had teenagers. A new generation of children played in the neighborhoods where April had once ridden her bicycle, and then the killer surfaced again. In June 2004, a young girl in Fort Wayne found a plastic bag hanging from her bicycle, which was parked in her front yard. Inside the bag was a handwritten note and a used condom. The note read, "Hi honey, I've been watching you. I am the same person that kidnapped, raped, and killed April Tinsley. You are my next victim." The girl's parents immediately called police. Detectives arrived and secured the evidence. Within days, 4 more similar packages were discovered, all left on bicycles, all containing handwritten notes and used condoms, all threatening young girls. The notes were analyzed. The handwriting matched the notes from 1990. The condoms were sent to the lab for DNA testing. A profile was successfully extracted from the semen inside the condoms. The profile matched the DNA from April Tinsley's case. This was him. The same man who had killed April in 1988 was now threatening other children in 2004. He was still in the area. He was still hunting, and he was taunting the police, daring them to catch him. The community reacted with terror and rage. Parents were furious. How was this monster still free? How had he evaded capture for 16 years? Why hadn't DNA technology found him? The DNA profile was entered into CODIS, the FBI's national DNA database. There was no match. The killer had never been arrested. He had no criminal record. He was a ghost. Police increased patrols. They stationed officers in neighborhoods where the notes had been found. They urged parents to supervise their children at all times. They released the handwriting samples to the public, hoping someone would recognize it. But no one came forward. The killer disappeared back into the shadows. The note stopped. The case went cold once again. Years passed. 2004 became 2010. 2010 became 2015. April Tinsley's case remained unsolved. The DNA profile sat in databases, waiting for a match that never came. Janet Tinsley aged. She never stopped grieving. She never stopped seeking justice for her daughter. Every year on April 1st, she held a memorial. She spoke to reporters. She kept April's name alive. She refused to let the world forget. Fort Wayne Police Detective Brian Martin had been working the case since 2015. He had read every report, reviewed every piece of evidence, interviewed every surviving witness. He had submitted the DNA profile to every database available. Nothing had worked. Then, in April 2018, everything changed. The Golden State Killer was arrested in California using genetic genealogy. The technique demonstrated that even decades-old DNA could be used to identify killers by building family trees through public genealogy databases. Cold case detectives across the country took notice. Detective Martin reached out to Parabon Nanolabs, the Virginia-based company at the forefront of genetic genealogy for law enforcement. He explained April's case. He provided the first present work. DNA evidence both from April's body and from the condoms left in 2004. Parabon agreed to take the case. Number, Part 8, Building the Family Tree. Parabon's genetic genealogy team began work in May 2018. They extracted DNA from the evidence. They built a comprehensive genetic profile. They uploaded it to GEDmatch, the public genealogy database. Within days, they had matches, distant relatives, third cousins, fourth cousins, people who shared DNA with April's killer. None of them knew they were related to a murderer, but their DNA held the key to his identity. Parabon's genealogists began constructing family trees. They traced lineages backward through generations, identifying common ancestors. Then they worked forward, following every branch, tracking every descendant. They focused on men who would have been adults in 1988, men who had lived in or near Fort Wayne. The work was meticulous, hundreds of hours. Thousands of records, birth certificates, marriage licenses, census data, obituaries, social media profiles. Each match provided a clue. Each clue narrowed the pool of suspects. By late June 2018, the genealogists had narrowed the field to a single family line, and within that line, living in Fort Wayne, was a man who fit every parameter: John D. Miller. John David Miller, born in 1961, 57 years old in 2018. He had lived in Fort Wayne his entire life. He was a lifelong resident of the same neighborhoods where April had lived, where the notes had been found, where the condoms had been left. He had been 26 years old in 1988. The right age, the right profile. Miller worked as a mechanic. He had worked at several auto repair shops over the years. He lived alone in a modest house on the north side of Fort Wayne. He had never married. He had no children. He kept to himself. Neighbors described him as quiet, unremarkable, forgettable. But genetic genealogy had pointed directly to him. Detective Martin needed confirmation. Genealogy provided a strong lead, but it was not enough for an arrest. He needed direct DNA. He needed to prove beyond any doubt that John Miller was April's killer. Martin launched a covert surveillance operation. Officers watched Miller's house. They followed him to work. They tracked his movements. They waited for an opportunity to collect his DNA without alerting him. On July 2nd, 2018, detectives followed Miller to a local grocery store. Miller purchased a few items and left. After he drove away, detectives entered the store. They obtained the shopping cart Miller had used. They collected it as evidence. The cart was transported to the lab. Forensic technicians swabbed the handle, looking for skin cells, sweat, any trace of DNA Miller might have left behind. They found it. The DNA was analyzed. It was compared to the profile from April Tinsley's case and the 2004 condoms. It was a match, a definitive, conclusive match. John D. Miller was April Tinsley's killer. July 15, 2018, 6 a.m. Fort Wayne police SWAT team surrounded John Miller's house. Detectives had obtained an arrest warrant. They had coordinated the operation carefully. Miller was considered dangerous, a child murderer who had evaded capture for 30 years. Officers knocked on the front door. Miller answered, still in his pajamas, groggy from sleep. He appeared confused. Detectives identified themselves. They informed Miller he was under arrest for the murder of April Tinsley. Miller's expression changed. For a moment, there was recognition, then resignation. He didn't resist. He didn't ask questions. He simply nodded. He was handcuffed and placed in the back of a patrol car. A search warrant was executed on Miller's house. Detectives spent hours combing through his belongings. They found nothing directly related to April's case. No souvenirs, no photographs, no trophies. But they found evidence of his obsessions. A computer filled with child pornography, disturbing images, evidence of a den, man who preyed on children. Miller was transported to the Allen County Jail. He was booked on charges of murder, child molesting, and criminal confinement. Bond was denied. That afternoon, Fort Wayne police held a press conference. Chief Steve Reed stood at the podium, flanked by Detective Martin and representatives from Parabon Nanolabs. Today, Chief Reed announced, "We have arrested John D. Miller for the 1,988 murder of April Tinsley. Through the use of genetic genealogy and DNA evidence, we have identified the person responsible for April's death and for the threatening notes and packages left in our community over the years." After 30 years, April's family finally has justice. The room erupted in applause and tears. Reporters shouted questions. Cameras flashed. Janet Tinsley, now in her 50s, attended the press conference. She had waited 30 years for this moment. She wept openly. "I never gave up hope," she told reporters. "I knew this day would come. I knew April would get justice." John Miller was interrogated by detectives. He was read his rights. He waived his right to an attorney. He wanted to talk, and talk he did. Miller confessed. He admitted everything. He had been driving through April's neighborhood on Good Friday, 1988. He had seen her walking alone. He had followed her in his truck, an older blue pickup, just as witnesses had described. He had pulled up beside her. He had told her he knew her mother, that her mother had sent him to pick her up. April had believed him. She had gotten into the truck. Miller had driven her to a wooded area outside of town. He had sexually assaulted her. When she began to scream, he had strangled her. Then he had driven her body to DeKalb County and dumped it in the ditch. He admitted to writing the notes in 1990 and 2004. He said he had done it to taunt police, to feel powerful, to relive the crime. He admitted he had continued to watch children in Fort Wayne neighborhoods. He admitted he had fantasized about taking another victim, but had never acted on it again. When asked why he had killed April, Miller had no answer. He shrugged. He said he didn't know. He said it had been an impulse. He showed no remorse, no emotion. He spoke about April's death, the way someone might describe a car accident. Detached, clinical, as if it had happened to someone else. The confession was recorded. It was transcribed. It would be used against him in court. John Miller was charged with murder, 3 counts of child molesting, and criminal confinement. Prosecutors announced they would seek a sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. Miller's attorney advised him to plead guilty. The DNA evidence was overwhelming. The confession was recorded. There was no defense. A trial would be a formality, and the outcome was certain. In September 2018, John Miller appeared in Allen County Superior Court. He pleaded guilty to all charges. He showed no emotion as the charges were read. He offered no apology to April's family. Judge Fran Gull presided. She listened to victim impact statements. Janet Tinsley spoke, describing the 30 years of pain, the nightmares, the fear, the unending grief. She spoke about April, the little girl who loved coloring and riding her bicycle, the daughter who had been stolen from her on a spring afternoon. Judge Gull sentenced John Miller to 80 years in prison. Given his age 57, it was effectively a life sentence. He would die in prison. Miller was led out of the courtroom in shackles. He never looked back. The arrest and conviction of John Miller brought closure to Fort Wayne. Parents could finally breathe easier. The monster who had terrorized their community for 3 decades was behind bars. The taunting notes would never appear again. The fear could finally begin to fade. But questions remained. Why had Miller never been caught? He had lived in Fort Wayne his entire life. He had no criminal record. He had never been on the police radar. He was, by all outward appearances, a normal person. But beneath the surface, he was a predator. He had killed once and had never been held accountable. And that lack of accountability had emboldened him. He had taunted police. He had threatened other children. He had lived freely for 30 years, while April's family suffered. The case also highlighted the power of genetic genealogy. Without that technology, John Miller might never have been identified. His DNA was not in any criminal database. Traditional investigation methods had failed. But by using public genealogy databases, by building family trees, by applying modern science to decades-old evidence, justice became possible. Parabon Nanolabs was praised for its work. The technique used in April's case became a model for cold case investigations across the country. Hundreds of unsolved cases have since been solved using genetic genealogy. April Tinsley's case was one of the first, and it proved that no matter how much time passes, the truth can still emerge.